It is a moment still etched on her mind. I even remember exactly what I was wearing. A beautiful little Jaeger twill cotton suit. The Mary Quant look with a short skirt and, of course, long hair, she says, guffawing with laughter. She was then a 27-year-old geography teacher far from her home in the northeast of England, which she left to go to university in the southwest. He was an older man, every inch the chisel-jawed Royal Navy commander looking forward to retirement in a couple of years' time at the age of 45. I looked across and it was just, you read about it and you think, what a load of rubbish. What a load of rubbish, and that was it. It was a love-at-first-sight job. A month later, I sent my parents a telegram saying, "Arranged wedding." We were married in Durham, literally a month after we met. Eve's father, a detective chief superintendent and head of Durham CID, looked up the name and rank of Lieutenant Commander Nigel Tetley in the Royal Navy list to check the man his daughter was marrying was real. In fact, Nigel was from rather good stock, or, as Eve puts it now, from a très snob English family of British Empire days. His mother was the daughter of a judge in southern Africa, where Nigel himself was born and where his father was in the British Army. The newlyweds were nonconformist from the start. Eve rejected the logical route of officers' married quarters, and instead they set up home on board Nigel's boat, a 40-foot-long trimaran berthed in Plymouth's industrial docks. His two sons from his previous marriage, teenagers Philip and Mark, lived with them when they were not away at boarding school. It was the same boat, Victress, on which Nigel was now racing around the world in competition with 8 other men. Like so many of the other competitors, Nigel had tried, and failed, to raise sponsorship money for a purpose-built boat. As a result, he ended up leaving Britain's shores in the family home. At the photo shoot on the Thames, Eve Tetley was getting on considerably better with Françoise Moitessier than she was with Claire Crowhurst. When Eve mentioned her own unpaid bills, like £150 for a self-steering device for her husband's boat, she felt Claire was upstaging her with talk of bills for thousands. "I just didn't like her," says Eve, laughing loudly 40 years on. "It isn't often I don't like people. I don't think she liked me. We met just that once. Never since. Never talked. No communication." Claire Crowhurst remembers that meeting, and remembers putting to Eve that their two husbands were perceived as specific rivals before they'd even started. They were the only two to be sailing trimarans, a relatively new type of boat seen as fast but potentially dangerous for such a voyage. "There was that comment before they went," says Claire. "Nigel Tetley said the one person I'm not going to allow to beat me is Donald Crowhurst. When I met Eve in London, she brushed that comment off." It would be remarkable if the two women's memories of each other had not been influenced by the terrible events yet to unfold. Eve would go on to blame her rival's husband for the downfall of her own. Claire Crowhurst and Eve Tetley had one thing in common. Just as Eve had moved from Durham to Plymouth, so Claire had moved hundreds of miles from home as a young woman. She'd grown up in Killarney in the west of Ireland, where her Anglo-Irish mother had settled with an Irish farmer, converting to Catholicism in the process. Claire was barely out of her teens when she moved with her sister to England in what were the post-war years of the early 1950s. She worked in the BBC monitoring station at Caversham in Berkshire, where she typed up listening reports for Downing Street and the Oval Office. The two sisters shared a flat in Reading, and it was at one of their parties that Claire met Donald. He was in his mid-20s and had a growing reputation. Not only had he been an officer in both the RAF and the Army, he'd been thrown out of both for a series of largely drunken exploits, including trying to steal a car, being found under a bed in a compromising position with a brigadier's daughter, and crashing a car into a bus, for which he lost his licence. Without a car, but undefeated, Donald wooed Claire with trips on a tandem. It was great fun.